we are celebrating the baptism of the Lord today. It's a little hard to get our heads around that, considering that just last week, Jesus was no more than 2 years old. The wise men of Bethlehem have given way to the wild man of the wilderness who is baptizing people in the Jordan. Jesus is now somewhere near 30 years old. What happened in the intervening years is unknown. And we should also say that the idea of the religious use of ceremonial washing is not uniquely Christian. Travel to Jerusalem and ascend the Temple Mount. You'll see ancient mikvahs, places for ceremonial washing involved in worshiping at the temple. Near the Dome of the Rock in the nearby Al-Aqsa Mosque, Muslims practice the ceremonial washing as they prepare for prayer. Travel back to Jesus' day, and the Essenes, a religious group within Judaism, of which John the Baptist may well have been a member, washed many times a day to maintain physical and spiritual purity. So there's a lot of history and tradition behind this business of baptism. And when you begin having conversations within Christianity, there's a lot of history and tradition too. Some Christian traditions assert that unless you are baptized in that particular tradition, you're not really baptized. Some Christian traditions maintain that the only authentic baptism is baptism by immersion. Some Christian traditions argue that only those who can fully understand and explain baptism can be baptized. And for some Christian traditions, baptism is the goal, the end point. Baptism is the outward sign that salvation has come to the life of the individual. For some Christian traditions, people are saved and people are baptized, and in that order. But is that the only way? So we need to take the occasion of Jesus' baptism as a moment to think about what baptism means and what difference it makes in the lives of those who would be Jesus' disciples. In the liturgy for baptism, we say, through baptism we enter the covenant God has established. Within this covenant, God gives us new life, guards us from evil, and nurtures us in love. In embracing that covenant, we choose whom we will serve by turning from evil and turning to Jesus Christ. Baptism is the entrance into the new covenant God offers in Jesus Christ. That is its core meaning. The images of washing, regeneration, the waters of new birth, and all of the other powerful metaphors and similes used to discuss baptism follow on this basic statement. Baptism is the entrance into the new covenant God offers in Jesus Christ. In other words, in baptism, we take on a new way of living. Our values and behaviors change to more faithfully reflect the values and behaviors of our God. We identify ourselves first and foremost with God. This is what Jesus did in his baptism. Jesus came to the Jordan to be baptized by John to say, I am about all of what God is about. I will do what God calls all people to do. I will live as God calls all people to live. And Jesus came to those waters at the beginning of his ministry. He came to baptism as a way of identifying with God's purpose for all humanity and by giving his life to that work. Everything he did grew out of his baptism. His interaction with God's purpose, his acceptance of God's way of life, his embodiment of God's values and ideals, all of it grew out of his baptism. In baptism, Jesus surrendered to God. In our baptism, we surrender to God. There are still some Christian denominations that celebrate the sacrament of baptism privately. Only family and close friends are invited to the baptism, which takes place at a time other than the morning worship hour. It's usually a small, quiet affair. Contrast that with Jesus' own baptism. Jesus didn't arrange a private appointment with John. There were other people there to hear John's preaching and to be baptized by John. It was a communal activity and event. And especially for Presbyterians, it continues to be about the presence of the community. The community makes promises to those who are baptized. I ask you the question, do you, as members of the Church of Jesus Christ, promise to guide and nurture these who have come to be baptized by word and deed with love and prayer, encouraging them to know and follow Christ and to be a faithful member of his church? The promise of guidance, nurture, and encouragement in living the Christian life are integral to our understanding of baptism, as the community of faith takes on the responsibility of raising a new disciple in the love of God, demonstrated and proclaimed by Jesus Christ. United Methodist Bishop Will Willimon offers it to us in this way. We have often made the sacraments into individualized, privatized acts of personal piety rather than the communal, familial, ecclesial acts they were meant to be. Baptism is a sign that Christianity is not a home correspondence course in salvation. In the early church, baptism was celebrated in the very early morning hours. The candidates who had undertaken arduous preparation were taken to a special building in the pre-dawn darkness. The building was built over a stream. They entered the door, and inside the building were all the other members of the church wearing the white robes of the baptized. The candidates were asked the questions of faith. They faced west, the region associated with darkness, and renounced the devil and all evil. They were stripped of their clothes and baptized in the waters of the flowing stream. Then they emerged from the waters, faced east, the direction of the rising sun. And with the words of the ancient baptismal creed, they affirmed their faith, a creed that grew into what we know as the Apostles' Creed. They were then clothed in white robes and embraced by each member of the community. Now, I'm not suggesting a change in our baptismal practice. Though we might get a few more members in, I'm merely pointing out that the community of faith, the church, plays an unmistakable role in the practice of the sacrament of baptism. Finally, where is God in all of this? The simplest answer is everywhere. As God made the waters in the beginning, God offers us the waters of baptism. Again, Will Willimon makes this point. Baptism means everything that water means: cleansing, birth, power, refreshment, life, death. Everybody knows what it means to be thirsty, to be born again, to drown, or to be dirty. As God offers us water to sustain our human existence, God offers us the waters of baptism for cleaning, birth, empowerment, refreshment, and the enhancement of our lives and our living. In Jesus' baptism, according to Matthew, the voice of God was heard to say, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." In every baptism, whether we can hear it or not, the voice rings out, "This is my child, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." I actually heard that voice one day. At the First Presbyterian Church of Shelbyville, Kentucky, we were baptizing little Chase Logan. The parents of Chase brought him to the font, and my colleague Roy Sharp was celebrating Chase's baptism. After the water had been placed on Chase's head, Roy began to walk Chase up the aisle to introduce him to the congregation. The aisle he headed up was in the direction of the door that most people in the congregation used as an entrance and exit. Chase's sister Adrian, who was sitting on that side of the church, saw Roy heading to the door with her new baby brother. She got out of her seat, came down the aisle, ran across the chancel, up the aisle, grabbed Roy by the sleeve of his robe and said, "He's mine." And Roy said to the congregation, "Did you hear the voice of God? God says, he's mine." And so he was, and so he is, and so he ever will be. Isaiah gave us more words from God. Isaiah wrote, "I am the Lord. I have called you in righteousness. I have taken you by the hand and kept you. I have given you as a covenant to the people, a light to the nations, to open the eyes that are blind, to bring out the prisoner from the dungeon, from the prison those who sit in darkness." In baptism, God presents us with a new life, gifts us with a community in which to grow as God's people, and calls us God's own. And then God gives us to the world. God gives us to the world as ambassadors of God's love and agents of God's justice, righteousness, and peace. Baptism is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. Baptism, when you stop and think about it, is the beginning of our life as God's representatives, speaking truth to power, standing with those who stand alone, caring and advocating for the poor, demanding equal treatment for all people, healing the sick, feeding the hungry, housing the homeless, befriending the prisoner, welcoming the refugee, offering water to the thirsty, and proclaiming that God's love flows without restriction or condition. So is baptism an ending or a beginning? You decide. But give thanks that God has called you to and through the waters and into a new life that is rich and abundant and for now and evermore. Amen.